Hello and welcome to another very interesting edition of the Coach Pius Media class. Don't forget, in the last edition, we concluded the aspect of the media law called the defamation law. And I told you that after the defamation law, we'll be moving straight into the sedition law, which is still an aspect of the media law. Okay, so today we are going to be looking at the law of sedition as it applies to us as journalists, as media people, everything that has to do with the media. And like I would always say in these classes, I would tell you that the same law that applies to media persons also applies to non-media persons. But as a media person, you are only using this law to take precaution because these laws are actually basically meant for the media. Don't forget, I told you that because of its constitutional rule, okay, the media seems to enjoy some level of, freedom of speech beyond every other institution in this country. But in order to ensure checks and balances, there has to be a way of also keeping the media in check. And that is how this issue of the media law came about. So we talked about defamation. I'm sure that by now you are very familiar with the concept of defamation as it has to do with the media law. Okay, now we are going into sedition. And even though these things are legal terminologies or legal concepts, I try to make it as simplistic as possible so that even the layman out there will have an understanding of what we are saying. So, on the basis of that, when we talk about sedition, what exactly are we talking about? Is to ensure that you preserve the institution called government, okay? So that you don't abuse the power of government and you don't also incite Nigerians against themselves. That is the basis of the law of sedition. And of course, if you look at the section 50 of the Criminal Code, subsection 1 and 2, it also talks about sedition, what constitutes sedition, and all of that. So you may want to go into details by reading those sections of the Criminal Code I just mentioned, section 50, subsections 1 and 2. The summary of sedition here is that it is simply an act that incites the people against the government. That's the summary of it all. It is also an act that incites the people against themselves. For instance, you would be seen to have committed sedition if you call for an overthrow of either the president or the governor, okay? Or better still, you incite tribes against each other and also incite different social classes in the society against each other. For example, you incite those believed to be at the receiving ends on the negative policies of government, those you call the lower class. If you try to incite them against the upper class, you are automatically committing sedition. Okay, so these rules are there to also check you. Now, like I said, there are criteria to determine if sedition has actually been committed. One of them, you must have brought or your comments or your publications must have incited, number one, hatred, okay, and disaffection against the person of the head of state, of the federal government, or the governor of a state, or the government generally, which means that even if you incite hatred and disaffection against the local government chairman, you are committing an offense of sedition. Like for some people who will go on air and try to paint a kind of picture of this tribe against that tribe in a negative way, trying to cause bad blood between them, or this class, say the rich are getting richer while the poor are getting poorer. Now, it is not these comments in themselves that actually amount to sedition. What actually amounts to sedition is the intention behind them, as well as your actions as a person who has made those comments. In the course of making the comments, what exactly did you say? What did you intend to achieve? Were you just trying to analyze the activities of government and you came to a conclusion that the government has not performed well, and you say it the way it is? That has not in any way amounted to sedition. Okay? But a situation where you go beyond all of that and you try to call on the people not to remove the person of the president or the governor in another election cycle, okay, but to hit the street and forcefully and unlawfully remove them from power. As a journalist, making such comments automatically amounts to sedition. And that's why you will never find any smart, experienced journalist, no matter the provocation, calling for an unlawful removal of a governor, not to talk of the president of a country. And that's because, except if there is any latest amendment to the penalty of sedition, which actually amounts to treason, okay? The punishment for treason in Nigeria today is death sentence. In other words, it is a capital punishment. And you see the reason, as a journalist, you need to acquaint yourself with the necessary laws that have to do with you as a journalist, the media laws, of which sedition is one. So that when you are talking or writing, you know exactly where to draw the lines. So that even in criticizing government, which is your number one responsibility, you must also remember that where your right ends as a journalist, another man's right begins. So that's why I told you that some of these laws are put there to serve as checks for you as a journalist because of your freedom of speech, so that you don't go out of lines to begin to do things that you ordinarily should not do. And that was why in the military era, you saw that a lot of journalists were tried and even executed as a result of this law of sedition. Okay? Because if you are not careful, your comments could be interpreted in so many ways, including the fact that you are committing sedition, which is a treasonable offense. So you must always watch what you say. The point I'm trying to make here is that criticizing government in itself is not what amounts to sedition, but the exact action words used, okay, is what determines whether you have reached that level of sedition. And the whole summary of it is that if your publication or your speech amounts to trying to incite the people to overthrow a government, okay, you're automatically hitting the line of sedition. And that's why you must understand this aspect of the law, how important it is in your practice as a journalist. Apart from the government, like I told you, if you make comments that also amount to inciting disaffection among citizens of the country, either politically, tribally, ethnically, or trying to set or divide people or pitch people on the basis of their beliefs against one another in such a manner that it will cause disagreement, it will cause controversy, it will cause crisis at the end of the day. That is also counted as a seditious publication or comment. Because don't forget, one of the roles of the media is to actually unite the nation. We must always bear that in mind. Okay? The role of the media is never to cause disintegration in the country. It has never been to pull the country down. And that's where the issue of national security always comes first. So, when your publications amount to dividing the people, pitching them against themselves, that is seen as sedition. Apart from individuals, by law, if you also attempt to do anything that is against the constitution of the land, which is the grand norm, which is the number one guide or body of rules in every of our actions as citizens of this country, the moment your actions or publications intend to incite people against the constitutional prescription of our land, automatically you are causing incitement, and that amounts to sedition. For instance, we have the Supreme Court, which is believed to be the court of finality. Assuming the Supreme Court, having looked at a particular case and at the end of the day passes a judgment on that case, do you know that the moment that happens, for instance, it becomes law? So, if you have to act anything contrary to that judgment of the judiciary, that becomes sedition. So, as a journalist, if you have to write, trying to make points that counter what the Constitution has prescribed, okay? If you try to do your analysis, base it on any other law outside what the Constitution of the country has prescribed, just know that you are already committing sedition, okay? Which has its consequences. Like I said, sedition amounts to treason, and the consequence or the penalty for treason in Nigeria today, the way I know it, is capital punishment. When we talk about capital punishment, we are talking about death. Okay? If you are tried and you are found guilty at the end of the day, capital punishment becomes your portion. So the job that we do as journalists is a very, very risky job. And that's why you must acquaint yourself with all these laws so that you know how to act, you know where to draw the limits, even when you are making your public comment with a view to holding government to account. The Constitution has given you the powers, but also the same Constitution has also put some hedges, okay, so that you don't allow your freedom of speech to become a source of abuse, okay, for the rights and privileges of others, because they are equally as much Nigerians as you also are. What I just gave to you is practically the summary of what sedition is about. Now you have some aspects of sedition. It's just for me to reel them out very briefly for you. The first one is seditious libel. Simply put, it means, just like we talked about libel in the case of defamation, it's similar to this case. It simply means that any form of incitement, written or in any other permanent form, okay, that tends to excite the people to want to revolt against the government, to want to overthrow the government of the day. Such amounts to seditious libel. So you must take note of that, just like in the case of, libel when it had to do with defamation. There is also another one, and that is seditious conspiracy. We talk about seditious conspiracy where two or more persons tend to put their heads together, that is, conspire to overthrow the government by themselves. And as a journalist, your publications or comments could put you in that position where you could be seen as intending to conspire with others to overthrow the government of the day. And that is why even when you do your analysis, you have to be very, very careful. Okay? So, seditious conspiracy is also a major crime against the state. Now, all these things that I have said here, you can see that if you allow yourself to fall victim of any one of them, you can't be taken up for it. That is why, as a journalist, as much as you have your right to criticism, as much as you have the liberty to self-expression, you must also know where to draw the lines. And one way to do so is to make sure that whatever you have written comes with some level of facts. Okay? There must be fact in your write-up. Like in the case of defamation, whatever comments or publications you make must also tend towards fairness. It must be seen to be trying to hold government to account and not trying to incite the people to remove the government illegally. So that's the difference between criticism and sedition. Okay? That's why I told you ab initio that sedition most times is not judged by what you say, but how you say it, the manner in which it is said, and the intentions behind it. And that's why you must understand this very law so that you, again, do not fall victim of it. Because a lot of times, when you have a government that is liberal, okay, it tends to overlook some of all these things. But when you have a government that is dictatorial, it tends to take these things very seriously and could use some of these things against the journalist. And that's why, as a Nigerian journalist, if you have not familiarized yourself with the law of sedition, you need to go and read Chapter 4 of the Nigerian Constitution in its entirety, as well as Section 50, subsections 1 and 2 of the Nigeria's Criminal Code, just to familiarize yourself with the sedition laws. And what is the penalty for sedition? Well, depending on the weight of what you have done, there are certain prescriptions that say you could be slammed in prison for 1 year, okay, with an option of fine or both. But there are also some other aspects of sedition too that could cost you your life. In other words, the penalty is capital punishment. So by the time you read some of these things in details, you will you will get to have a clearer understanding of what sedition is and how to navigate this path, okay, of practice without having to be charged with sedition by the government of the day in the course of discharging your role as a journalist. I hope you have learned one or two things in this class. All you need to do for me so that more journalists out there or more Nigerians who are interested in the media will also get to have this kind of information is for you to kindly share, okay, this content. Make your comments on the YouTube page, that is Coach Pius Media Class. Ask your questions. I've been answering a few questions that have been asked there. And of course, the only way you can follow is for you to subscribe and also encourage your friends to do the same. That is the only way we will continue this class, and it will be sustainable for both you and me. Thank you.